Hello everyone, welcome to section handling. Topic: handle exception using try catch finally clauses, try with resource and multi-catch statements. Exception: Java uses exception to handle errors and other exceptional events. It alters the program flow. I have made one project in IntelliJ exception handling, and to explain exception, I am going to use string array and try to call element at first location. So as we have not passed anything in the main method, it will give an error. So this is an exception. We will study more in detail. All exceptions are a child of java.lang.throwable. We have two types of exception, check exception and uncheck exceptions. Check exceptions, they must be declared or handled by application where it is thrown. And uncheck exception doesn't need to be declared or handled by application where it is thrown. There are further two types of uncheck exception, error and runtime exception. Error are those exceptions thrown by JVM, and they shouldn't be handled or declared, otherwise it's considered to be a very poor programming. A runtime exception, they occur while the program is running. This is exception hierarchy. So throwable class, direct descendant of the object class, further two classes, exception and error, as I have explained. Exception has a lot of check exceptions and runtime exception, which is unchecked. All the classes, those are subclasses of runtime exceptions, are unchecked. These classes do not need to be declared or handled. Same for the error. However, all the classes underneath the exception, with the exception of the runtime, needs to be handled or declared. They are called as check exception. Let's deal with these classes one by one. First, I come to the arithmetic exception. If I do int answer 11 divided by 0, so it gives me arithmetic exception, and the reason is divided by 0, which gives an infinity. Next exception, we have array index out of bound exception, which is a direct descendant of index out of bound exception. I would like to make an array of integers. I say count of moose equals to new and then I would like to print the value at -1 index. As we know that each element starts from 0 and ends is length -1. So when I run this program, it will give me index out of bound exception. So index -1 out of bound for length 3, right? Next is class cast exception. In the class cast exception, I would like to make a string type and now I would like to make an integer and try to cast this string into integer. However, compiler gives me an error and says that incompatible types. What would if I make an object and try to assign this string into object, because everyone comes from the object class, and now I would like to assign this object reference into integer. So compiler cannot figure out that what is in the object, which is a string at this time. However, at the runtime it says it is a class cast exception. Class string cannot be cast into integer. Right. Next we see is null pointer exception. So if I make a string name and I would like to check the length, so as we know that this is a string and instance variable, and if we do not assign anything there will be a null, and if you call any reference it will give a null pointer exception. Okay. Next see illegal argument exception. For that I would like to make a method public void set number of eggs int number eggs, and if number of eggs are more than equal to 0, then what would it should do? There is an instance variable, so put this setter method value into an instance variable. What would if I call this method and put -2? If I run this one, so it doesn't give me any useful information. If it is negative, so now I would like to throw an exception. Throw new illegal argument exception, and I can pass a message. This is a overloaded constructor. Number of eggs must not be negative. Okay. So this is a way how we throw an exception. by throw keyword inside the method. So now it says illegal argument exception, and the message is also right there. Okay, so the compiler also gives us these messages as we have thrown. Next, let's do number format exception. So if I would like to parse a string into integer like 1, so it gives the value in integer. What about if I put some string? What it will give me? It gives a number format exception. That input is a string, is not a number. All right. Now we have seen a lot of runtime exceptions. All arithmetic index, array index out of bound exception, class cast exception, number format exception, null point exceptions are unchecked exceptions and throw by JVM. And we have seen that the illegal argument exception is unchecked exception thrown by programmer. We have thrown that one. Now let's see some errors, very common ones: stack overflow and exception in initializer error. So if I make a initializer, and in this initializer I would like to introduce some values, and let's see what it would be. So when we run this one, it gives first exception in initializer error, and then further array index out of bound, that index -1 out of bound for length number 3, which we have done earlier. All right, so this error normally comes during the time of initialization. Next one, let's see stack overflow error. For that example, I would like to make a method do not code this int num, and I say do not code this one. Let's make it static, so easy to call inside the main method. And okay, so when we call this one, it will repeat itself, and this method is recursive, so it will give a stack overflow exception. See, we go all the way up, say stack overflow exception. All right, no class def found error is a Java cannot find the class at the runtime. However, could find at the compile time but not at the runtime, then gives this for the error. So let's see some check exceptions. Input output exception thrown by programmer when there is a problem reading or writing file, and file not found exception is a subclass of IO exception. It's thrown by programmer when try to reference a file that does not exist. All right. So we need to know that the file not exception is a child class of IO exception, and non-serializable exception is also a child of IO exception. So these are the parts exception and actual exception. You will also see in another topics of this OCP course. Okay. The one thing you need to remember in this hierarchy, that a word otter, so instead of OTTER otter, I say OTEER otter. So O for object, T for throwable, E for exception, E for error, and R for runtime. So if you remember these main 5 classes, then you can easily figure out the rest of them, right, for your exam. Approaches. There are 2 approaches. The first one, handle, and the second one is declare. Handle means wrapped in compatible try catch block, and declare state in the method signature. So how we handle, let's see. So exception handle we do in a try catch block. So the syntax of a try statement, we have a try, the curly brackets, they are required, and followed by catch or finally. So catch is a keyword, and there's a bracket inside. So the first one is exception type, and like an identifier, like a class and a reference, and the identifier of an exception object, and the exception handles inside the catch block. So the protected code in the try block throw an exception and catch the exception and handle the exception and continue the program flow. All right, so let's do it through the coding. This is our main class. To explain this, I would like to make a method. I say void fall int distance, and I say if distance is greater than 10, then throw new IO exception. All right. Let's put in the try catch block, and okay. Okay, so as you can see that this one, what we have done, we have handled the exception. So for handling exception, we use a try catch block. In the try, there is a code which throws an exception, and catch is going to catch, and here it will print the output of exception. Throw is a keyword which we use inside a method to throw an exception. All right. Next is handle, declare. So I say void fall to int distance, and the same line of a code. If I would like to declare, so I could do like this as well, throw IO exception. So what it means, throw is that it's not throw, this throws. This keyword allow to throw this exception to the caller. Here we are handling the exception, and here we are passing this exception to the caller. So there are two ways to handle the exception. Okay. As you have seen that, all right. Here you have seen two keywords, throw and throws. Throw an exception is actually being thrown. As you have seen that in the side the try block, we have thrown an exception with an exception object, and throws is the method merely has a potential to throw an exception. We use in the declaration. What it means that? It means that, for instance, if I do not throw an exception inside the method, so it will not give a compiler error, right? It means that this method has a potential to throw an exception, but either you throw it or not, that's not a problem. So compiler won't give an error if you declare with the method. However, if you do over here inside a try block, nothing is throwing an exception, so it will give a compiler error if there's, especially with the unchecked exceptions, not with the especially with the checked exceptions, not with the unchecked exceptions. All right. Okay. Next, we cannot use more than one throw statement in one try block. So if this is a try block, right, I put here this one, and I like to put another throw new runtime exception. So compiler won't gonna let me do it. The reason why, if we have a one exception without any condition, we cannot have another exception in the same try block. Okay. All right. Let's summarize what we have done here. So according to the types of exception, we have two types: check exceptions and unchecked exceptions. Check exceptions are the subclasses of exceptions, but with exception of but not the subclass of runtime exception. It is okay to cache them. Program is required to handle or declare, as we have seen, the IO exception. Runtime exception, they are subclasses of runtime exceptions. It is okay to cache. Program is not required to handle or declare. Where I have put the IO exception, I could put the runtime exception, and if there is a runtime exception inside the code, we do not need, or we do not require to handle or declare. With the error, it's okay to catch? No, it's not okay, and it's not okay to handle or declare. The reason why, it's considered to be a very bad programming if we deal with error class, and those are specifically for JVM. Curly brackets are required for try, catch, and finally block. So we have a class myTry, and in this class I will make a try catch block, and in the try I have a method fall, and this method throw exception, and when the exception is thrown, it catch by a catch block and print get up. Okay, now run this block and see. Okay, so what would if I remove the brackets, curly brackets over here? It won't compile. However, with if and loop, we can have a one line, but with a try, catch, and finally we couldn't have. Okay, next is the order of try statement is try followed by catch and finally block. So the order is try followed by catch and finally block. If I try to change this order, I try to do try finally catch, so compiler will give me an error. Okay, next is it is either followed catch or finally block or both. So what it means, that it means that you cannot write a try block alone. The compiler will give you an error. So try block is always either with catch try finally. So there's a no catch block, so I said add exception to method signature, so it will add exception here. Okay, and it could be try catch finally. Okay, so these are the three versions, so try cannot be alone. All right, next is when checked exception declared inside a catch block, make sure try block is capable of throwing exception or subclass of exception. This rule doesn't apply to unchecked exceptions, exception declared in a method signature, exception class. So let's try make a class bunny which has two methods, good and eat carrots. In this class I will make try catch block and I will declare one class no more carrots exception, which extends exception class, and I will catch this exception over here, and I will this method here. Okay, so as you can see that eat carrot method is not throwing any kind of exception, and we are putting in the try catch block, and this block is especially for handling exception, so compiler will not allow us to do that. Okay, so make sure this one. So what would if we have a uncheck exception, like if I put here null pointer exception? Yes, there won't be any kind of issue. Okay, next is what would if I have exception declared in a method signature? So public void good, and I call here this method, and I throw a checked exception, no more carrots exception, so it is acceptable. Okay, so compiler will not throw an error if we use uncheck class or declare with the method. Next is exception class, and compiler will also not give us error if we use an exception class. So exception class is a check class. Why it is not giving an error? The reason is runtime classes are also a subclass of exception. So there might be a code inside which can give a runtime exception. That's why we have a exception class. That's why we try to use more specific one, not use exception class. So even though this code doesn't throw any kind of checked exception, might throw the runtime exception. So that's why it is very important to use the specific exception which is likely to happen in the catch block. Okay, so these are the three rules. Next, chaining catch block. When unchecked exception and its subclasses declared inside catch block, make sure subclass catch block must followed by superclass catch block. So for that, I will make a class chaining catch. There are further three classes inside. First, extend the runtime exception. Second, also extend the runtime exception, and third one is the child class of the second class. And the chaining catch has four methods, and let's do it. Okay, so let's make a try catch block. Okay, in this try catch block, I call method cAnimals, and here I put animal out for walk, and another catch exception, exhibit closed. Okay, so as you can see that animal out for walk and exhibit closed, they are both the subtypes of runtime exception. However, they are not related to each other. So this is you can say that both of them are unchecked exception in chaining catch, and we are free to use unchecked except section. Okay, so the next one is if I use exhibit closed for lunch, which is a subclass exception, and it followed by superclass exception, so it is allowed. So on the checked exception, make sure that the first exception, the closest exception, should be more defined one, the subclass, not the superclass. What would if I do the superclass followed by subclass? Compiler will give me an error. Okay, all right. And next is cannot use exception type outside the catch block. If I have try block of runtime exceptions, they no need to follow any kind of subclass followed by superclass for the runtime. It's only for, because they are unchecked exception. This is only for the check exception. This rule is these are the two runtime classes. If I put the output E1 and here also the same one E1, so compiler will give an error. Make sure, this might come in the exam, that if reference E1 is out of scope, is out of the catch block. All right, save this one. Declare an overriding method with exception. When a class overrides a method, it's not allowed to add new check exception to a method signature. So for that, I will create a new class called as bunny, and here I declare an exception class cannot hop exception extends exception, and I create one class hopper, which is a parent class. It has one method, public void hop, and it has one child class, which is bunny, and it has the same method. Okay, now this is a subclass, and this method is writable method, and try to throw some checked exception, so compiler will give an error. Okay, so make sure that you know this thing in the exam. All right, what would if I do the same thing with unchecked exception, like illegal argument exception? So compiler will not give any error. It's only for check exception. So you cannot declare a new check exception with a method. Next, an overridden method in a subclass is allowed to declare fewer exceptions than the superclass or interface. Okay, what it means. So Control C, I make a class called as same class bunny1, change everything here by 1 1 1, and then what I do here and here the parent class method throws exception, so we can skip the exception in the child overrideable method. Okay, so we have not declared anything, so that's fine. So rule number 3 about the unchecked exception: a class is allowed to declare a subclass of a exception type. So subclass of exception type, make another class bunny2 and make everything over here too. So if I do like this, a super type in the parent overrideable method and overrided method and put throw cannot hop exception, it is acceptable. Okay, and the next thing, next rule is methods are free to throw any unchecked exception they want without mentioning them in the method declaration. As you have seen that in this class, that these runtime exceptions and unchecked exceptions we can throw without any hesitation. Okay, here we have a parent class and a child class. In parent class have a method, child class overrided that method, parent class declare an exception and child class declare a subtype of exception. So for the check exception, same subtype, or you have seen do not declare anything is okay. However, with the runtime, freely write anywhere. Okay. Next is multi-catch block. Multi-catch block are to ease our program. If there are one or two more exception have a same exception handling technique, so we can put exception type in a one catch block and use OR in between, which is, you can see that here is a pipe sign logical OR. Make sure that there is a single identifier for all exceptions. So we have a class multi-catch exception, and in this class we make try catch block, and here we have index array auto bound exception, and another we have number format exception. If we have integer dot parse int and use argument 1, so we know that if we do not pass anything, it will throw an exception. And if it's send the array index out of bound exception, message will print out missing or invalid input. And if the same is over here, so you can see that these both errors print out the same. Let's run this program. Okay, so now in Java, if we want, we can merge both together like this: array index out of bound except our number. In the try catch block, we have a one exception. If we put file not found exception and IO exception. Okay, and we print out over here. Here we throw new IO exception. So you can see that in multi-catch block, these two exceptions are related to each other. File not exception is a subtype of IO exception, so it is not allowed over here. Okay, what is the solution to that? So we have to take away one exception, okay, to run this code. That's what it says, that the exceptions inside the multi-catch are not related. Exception can be listed in any order, but variable name appear to be once. Like if I can do array, it could be over here, or it could be here. Okay, but variable should be only in the last. Next is finally block. Finally block always execute whether or not an exception is thrown or return statement is used, except encounter system.exit 0. Okay, so let's make one finally block. Okay, I have a class here, finally. Okay, as out, I say if it is 1, and I say this one is as out 2, and this is as out 3. This method return an integer, so we can say return -1, here return -2, and here we say return -3. Okay, if I would like to call this method, so how could I do that? I need to make a object, and then I need to call this instant method and see that what would be the value. So it comes 1 3 minus 3. Okay, so let's do it like this. So try the one is over here. There is no effect with the return. If the exception is not thrown, it bypasses the catch block and goes to the finally. It added the 3, and after that it returned minus 3. So you have seen that the return of here in the try block doesn't affect, or any part of the method doesn't affect finally block override return anywhere return, and the return over here returns the value. Okay. What would if we have a code which throw an exception? So here let's see that okay. So here we are calling one method fall, which will throw an exception. So it will go over here, and 1 will not print out, it will print out 2, and then 3, and value again return minus 3. Let's see that. Go to home. Okay. So you can see it's 2 3 and minus 3 this time. So these two lines it is skipped. It goes inside the catch block 2 and then 3, and return is this value minus 3. It prints out over here. Okay, right. Next is what would if we have exception in finally, like if I say string exception in finally block. So as you know that we can do like try finally, and this throw IO exception. So it's always should be new. Take care in the exam, they normally do it like that. Okay, and for that I say declare one class variable like string info, and you know that this value would be null. If I say info dot toString, it will throw a null pointer exception, and I say sout exiting, and then return zoo. Okay, so you can see that this is an IO exception in a try block, and here there's a null pointer exception. If there are two exceptions, so the first exception is called as primary exception, which I will discuss with resource, and the second one is called as suppressed exception. So if there is a exception in the finally, so suppress exception will come, not the primary one. Okay, so make sure you remember. So we need to call this method in our main method and see how it goes. Yes, 46 here. Okay, exception is here. All right, so the next is this code through an exception. Let's comment this one. Okay, okay, what would if I commit this one and see what would be the result if try throw an exception and if there is a finally. So you can see that that exception has suppressed over the finally, and result have gone, and whatsoever in the finally overrided that one. Okay, all right. Next, finally block always execute whether or not exception is thrown or return statement is used except encounter system.exit.0. What is this? So void exit, then I make try catch block system.exit finally is out. I say never going to get here, and if I call f dot exit, will finally execute or no. Okay, so if whenever it comes this line finally will not execute. So as you can see that the exiting is due was from here, and whatsoever in the finally it doesn't come. If I put s out here and put number 1, see that is number 1 comes or not. No, it doesn't come. Anything after that doesn't come. It just take out completely. All right. Okay. Next is a summary try statement. So legal versus illegal configuration with traditional try statement. So it is not legal that try statement is completely single without any catch or finally block. Yes, we could have one or more catch blocks and only one finally block. Okay, we cannot have 2 or more finally blocks. So as we have seen, so this is a summary for that. Automatic resource management. So what is a resource? Resource could be a file database that requires some kind of a stream or connection to read or write. So whenever we use these resources, they can throw an exception. So what is the process? We open the resource, we read write the resource, and then we close the resource. We make sure the resource must be closed after the completion of operation. Otherwise, it remain open, and the problem would be resource leak. And you will read about the resource leak further during the security. So uh, it is not like a garbage collection. So Java has a great built-in support for garbage collection. So whenever you finish with an object, it will automatically reclaim the memory associated with it. However, it is not true with the uh, resource management. So resource leak, when a program fails to release its connection to a resource, resulting in resource becoming inaccessible. So let's see one code here. This is a class. It has a method read file. It open up the input stream and read the file. If the file is not present, so it will give an exception. e.print stack trace means it prints out all the problems and all the methods in the stack in from top uh, uh, top down fashion. Okay, and then finally what it does, as you know that no matter what happened, finally always execute exception with the system.exit if the reference has an object is not null, then try to close it. And then if there is an exception with that, then also handle the exception or print the exception. So there you can see that how big is a line of a code. Okay, so we might forget of closing our resource, and we are using a lot of our resources in the programming. So Java 7 has given us a facility to use try with resource. Okay, so what is a try with resource? The same method I am going to use in try with resource. Let's make it read file too. Okay, and what I'm going to do here in the try, I make a bracket. Okay, in this bracket I am going to use this object. Okay, all right, and then after that we no need to do this finally block. Whatsoever the code in the finally will be implicitly written by compiler. Okay, so you can see that how much the code has reduced. So just the 4 lines, and it's very easy to read. Okay, so this is what it's doing. It is make sure that whatsoever resource is open in the brackets must be closed before the end of try block. Okay, let's make a class which includes AutoCloseable, my file class, and this class implements AutoCloseable. Implement method, close. All right, so let's make private final int num a variable, and then create a constructor and this constructor use to initialize instance variable, and in the closing write closing and the number. Okay, make another class order of operation, and in this class we will use try resource. So I use my file class and say f1 equals to new my file class, and there's a num, I put integer here. Okay, and then I make another object my file class f2 equals to new my file class, and value is 2. Okay, and this one throw new runtime exception, and let's catch exception. All right, so and here I say s out ex. Let's see what happened. Let's build and run. So it created f1 the first object, f2 the second object, and it threw an exception. So before the end it tried to close each resource. So how to close the resource? This class, my file class, if I would like to put inside the resource parenthesis, must implement AutoCloseable, and there is a method close, so it will call the close method. So it closes from bottom to top. So the second one comes first and then the first one. You can see that the closing 2 and then closing 1. Okay, and because this 1 and 2 comes from the constructor, and then it it goes to the catch block. So what is it is doing behind the screen? Behind the scene, it is creating a implicit final and calling the close method to close these two resources. All right, can we declare our own finally here? So then there will be a 2 finally. Let's see that. Yes, we can do. So this is called as explicit final, which is declared by us. Okay, so make sure that you know this in the exam. Uh, it required sources that implement AutoCloseable or closable interface, which include void close method. It can include multiple resources which are closed after the try clause ends and before any finally catch clause is in the reverse order in which they are declared. We have seen that. This is a syntax. You can see the syntax of a try with resource exactly like this we have done. Any resources that should be automatically closed put in here. Then the protected code. Resources are closed at this point at the end of the try block. Then the catch block, optionally catch and finally close. So these catch and finally are optional. So you can write single as well. Okay. Each resource must include the data type and be separated by a semicolon. Var can be used as a data type. Okay. So what it means that here, if I use var keyword, it is acceptable. Okay, and it must be separated by semicolon. As you can see that we have put here a semicolon. What would if I put the comma? It will give me an error. Okay, there is an optional semicolon at the end of the secondary source. We can put or we do not put. There won't be issue. Okay, so I just put it over here. Okay. Next, try with resource is guaranteed to call the close method on resource. You have seen that it has called the close method and it closed the resources in reverse order. Catch and explicit final block are optional. So let's see. So if I use here the try catch block without try resource block without catch, so I just need to throw an exception while declaring with the method, and I can use this try resource without catch and finally, which is perfectly legal. Okay. Next, the resources created in the try clause are in the scope only within the try block. Let's make one method. Say public void scope, and in that method I try to call a scanner class and system.in, which is very famous for inputs s dot next int or next line. So the scope of a scanner is within the try block. As you can see that we can use exception or not with a try with resource. There won't be any issue, and we can also use the finally. So what about if I try to use this as within the try block or the finally block? Compiler will not allow me to do that. So it means that the resources created in the try clause are in the scope only within the try block. So if the resource has closed, we cannot use outside the try block. Okay. Next, so what is a legal versus illegal configuration with a try with resource statement? It could have single try block with no catch, no finally. It could have one or more catch block and one finally block. Okay, cannot have two. So next features are suppress exceptions and primary exception. For that, I would like to make a new class, jammed turkey cage, and it implements AutoCloseable. I'm going to implement the close method, and I would like to throw a runtime exception, illegal argument exception, and I'm going to throw this illegal argument exception with the method cage door does not close. Okay, so exception will be thrown upon the completion of resource block. So let's try this one. Var t equals to new turkey jammed, and here I would like to throw runtime exception, turkey ran off, and then I also, upon the completion of the close method, I would like to go catch block and print the message. Okay, now if we run this method, main method, so we can see that the first exception is runtime exception, which is a primary exception, and then it says the suppressed exception, which is illegal argument exception, cage door does not close. Okay, so this is the one. The second exception is suppressed exception. So exception inside exception, we can see in the try resource and normal try block. There is a one glitch, and I would like to mention here. Let's make a class 2, and if I have, instead of catch, a finally, and in the finally I am throwing an exception, and we couldn't find them. So what will happen if we run the program? So we can see that it throws only the finally. So error from the primary exception and the suppressed exception, all previous track has gone and it overrided. So this is a bad programming practice, so make sure don't do this one. Okay, all right. And I hope you like my tutorial in regards to exception. Please pass your comments. Thank you, and watch the next video.